What can you tell me about the composition process of trying, because you were taking Christmas songs and you were connecting them either sonically or in some way musically to other other game music, right?
Yeah, and it's one of those things where people either think that I have like a magic touch or that I spend hours or that I approach it very intellectually and technically, like, okay, this song uses a certain series of fifths or fourths, or you know what I mean? Like, I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I definitely play by ear, and a lot of it is stuff that I just kind of lean into whatever is coming naturally, and then I buckle down on either the melody or the bass line to start usually and figure out, is this working? Whether it's a track, a mashup track like 8 Bitches, or whether it's a direct cover track or an original track, I almost always start with melody or bass just to get an idea of how the final thing will sound or what the structure of the final thing is going to be. And then basically I just go from there and kind of, it becomes more grunt work at that point. Just trying different combinations of things that, because I play by ear, I don't always know what I'm actually putting down in the composition. I don't always know, oh, this is a major fifth or major sixth or that sort of thing. I do know what those chords are, but I rarely think about them. I just think about what it sounds like to me, what combinations of notes sound right, and I'll listen to the original and say, okay, this note stands out to me. This has to be in the cover of it. And that's a big part of composing with such few channels, is picking out those more distinctive notes that are going to hit harder on the realization that, oh, this is a cover of this song, or this reminds me of the original song, or it sounds like that game, or whatever, is picking out just the right notes to focus on, because you only have so many notes at a time.
Yeah, that struck me as one of the questions I thought was particularly interesting, and I was about to ask you about sort of compositional challenges, because it would seem like when you have a limited number of sounds to work with, it seems like there's a limit to how dynamic you can make a track, since everything's sort of feels like it's sort of pinging at the same time and roughly at similar volumes. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're again, another one of the challenges that I face, both the volume now, given, so I do have volume control on the first two channels, which allows me to fade in and out, and I can draw direct volume, changes into like the timeline, which is a nice way to be able to manipulate the sound. And it's a thing that is pretty unique to using MIDI to create them rather than a tracker, because a lot of people that make chiptunes use trackers. And I haven't really used trackers, but I understand the basic process of how they work. And basically you're just creating a note that you reuse, so that, you can create a note that starts really strong and then fades out over 1 second. And then you can repeat that note. And if you want a different kind of note in that track, you have to create that second note in the library of notes that you use, and so on and so forth. Basically, it's like putting together patterns. It's very typical of sequencing, in the history of sequencing, that how people did things back in the day, before they had the kind of interfaces they have on modern computers. And, most classic sequencers work that way. You're just creating patterns and reusing them in different ways, and you have X number of patterns you can use. But being able to use an actual like digital audio workstation and draw in these changes by hand gives me a lot more freedom, albeit still limited by the limitations of the system itself. So I can have these notes that fade in from real quiet and are real subtle, as opposed to just loud banging bleeps and bloops the whole time. And when people think of chiptunes, that's what they think of, because that's how most people create chiptunes. And that is kind of the appeal for a lot of people to chiptunes, is that just always busy, always going nuts in the background and the foreground, crazy tunes with, pitch bends and whatnot. And a lot of people associate that particular sound, but that to me would just be one genre of chiptunes within chiptunes. It's like chiptunes being dance music or electronic music or whatever, as opposed to chiptunes trying to cover a classical piece and create things that sound kind of like strings, even though they sound nothing like strings. I think I got away from the question again.
It's okay. When you made 8-Bit Jesus, at that point, all the compositions, all the tracks are like a minute and a half or less.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a function of just sort of where you were with a sense of what you could do with a chiptune at that point?
Yeah, that was definitely a part of it. one of the challenges is avoiding repetition, and with all the limitations that there are there, especially when the theme is a mashup of combining this track and this track. Sometimes you just get to that point where you're like, okay, this works really well. I like the way it sounds. I like the shared ground between the two source materials I've decided to combine into one. But there only seems to be so much I can do with this without taking it too far away. Like if I wanted to throw a bridge in there, and part of it is that a lot of Christmas songs are repetitive. It's the same tune over and over with different lyrics in each verse or whatever. And then a lot of video game tracks are very short, about a minute long, and they loop because that's their background music. They're not supposed to be full compositions with a beginning and an end like a regular song would be. So the fact that both sources of material were kind of short to begin with, melodically speaking or musically speaking, kind of forced me into that corner. And I did, on occasion make attempts to make the tracks themselves longer. But at that point, it just seemed like I would just be repeating the same part over and over with small differences here and there. And so I decided to focus on just making more tracks and covering more material rather than make a 12-track album with 5-minute long, or 4-minute long tracks of repetitive licks in the background of each one, and a melody that didn't change much throughout the course of it.
Yeah, I find the economy of those pieces is part of their beauty. The fact that I started when I found 8-Bit Jesus online, that I found that I would put it in Christmas music mixes for friends and for family, and having it there for a minute and a half worked out great. But I was thinking, if that was 3 minutes, I know a number of people who would be really tested by that.
Yes, that is another, that also has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah. The 12 Songs of Christmas podcast is available from Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and Pandora. Follow 12 Songs for new episodes weekly. You can also find us online at 12songsofchristmas.com and on Facebook at 12 Songs of Christmas as well.